The police car pulled up with a slow, deliberate stop. Its flashing lights painted the quiet suburban street in an eerie glow. My heart pounded as I turned to face the officer stepping out, his gaze shifting between me and the furious woman standing on my lawn. Karen, arms crossed, nostrils flaring, stood like a villain who had just executed her master plan. Finally, she shrieked, marching up to the officer before I could even say a word. "I've had enough of these hooligans disturbing the peace. You need to do something." The officer, an older man with tired eyes, sighed as he pulled out a notepad. "And by hooligans, you mean the children playing in their own yard?" "Yes," Karen spat, pointing a perfectly manicured finger toward my kids, who were now huddled together near the swing set, eyes wide with confusion. "They're loud, they're obnoxious, and I have been telling this man," she jabbed a finger toward me, "to control his brats, but he refuses. This is a clear violation of noise regulations." I took a deep breath, suppressing the urge to laugh at the absurdity of the situation. "Officer, all they were doing was playing tag," Karen gasped, clutching her chest like I had just admitted to a federal crime. "Playing tag? At this hour?" "It's nearly." She checked her watch, her expression faltering for just a second. 6:15 p.m. The officer gave her a long, unimpressed look. "That's not exactly a noise violation." Karen's face twitched. "It's disturbing. I work hard. I deserve peace and quiet in my own neighborhood." Before I could respond, my youngest daughter, Sophie, who had been clutching her stuffed unicorn, tilted her head and whispered loudly, "Daddy, is that the mean lady who said we should play inside forever?" The officer's lips twitched like he was fighting a smirk. I, however, had no such restraint. "Yes, sweetheart, that's her." Karen let out an exaggerated gasp. "This is harassment. Are you hearing this?" The officer exhaled, clearly reaching the end of his patience. "Do you have any evidence that these children are violating any laws?" Karen squared her shoulders. "I don't need evidence. I know the law. Children shouldn't be allowed to scream like wild animals whenever they please." "Ah." The officer jotted something down in his notepad. Karen's smug expression returned, but then the officer looked up and said something that wiped it right off her face. "I'm going to need to see your ID." For the first time since this ridiculous situation began, Karen hesitated. "What? What?" "Because you just admitted to knowingly making a false police report." Karen blinked. Her mouth opened and closed like a malfunctioning robot. "I know. They were disturbing the peace." At 6:15 p.m., the officer tilted his head. "Do you hear yourself right now?" Karen's arms flailed. "There are laws. I will not be disrespected like this." The officer flipped his notepad shut. "Do you know what the penalty is for misusing emergency services?" Karen's face turned a lovely shade of red. "Penalty? Yes," the officer continued. "Wasting police resources for personal grievances can result in a fine. And from what I'm hearing, this wasn't your first complaint about these kids, was it?" Karen's eyes darted toward me. I raised an eyebrow, enjoying every second of this. "Oh no, officer. She's been at this for months." He nodded. "Then I'll need to file a report." Karen's entire demeanor shifted. The smugness vanished, replaced by panic. Wait, you're finding me." "That's how it works," the officer said, pulling out a ticket book. My kids, sensing the shift in power, began whispering excitedly to each other. Even Sophie, who was usually shy around strangers, giggled and hugged her unicorn. Karen stomped her foot. "I called you to do something about them." "And I did," the officer said, writing down her name. "I found that no crime was committed, except for yours." The pure, undiluted rage that exploded from Karen in that moment could have powered an entire city. She sputtered, hands flapping like a broken windmill, face contorted into an expression of disbelief so dramatic it could have won an Oscar. "This is insane. This is abuse of power. This is a $500 fine," the officer finished, tearing the ticket from the book and handing it to her. Karen snatched it like it was coated in poison. "You're going to regret this," she hissed, her eyes narrowing at me. I smiled, tucking my hands into my pockets. "Oh, I sincerely doubt that." She turned on her heel and stormed back to her house, but not before stomping on a few of my kids' sidewalk chalk drawings in a petty final act of defiance. The officer exhaled and glanced at me. "Some people, huh?" I chuckled. "You have no idea." As he walked back to his car, my son whispered, "Dad, does this mean we can play louder now?" I grinned. "Maybe just a little." The car pulled away, and just like that, the most ridiculous, satisfying showdown I had ever experienced was over. Or so I thought. Because Karen? Oh, she wasn't done. Not even close. Karen didn't take the fine well. In fact, I had never seen a human being look so personally offended by a piece of paper in my life. She stood on her porch, gripping the ticket as if she could crush it into oblivion through sheer rage alone. For a moment, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then she locked eyes with me, her gaze filled with such unfiltered spite that it sent a clear message. I wasn't dealing with just an angry neighbor anymore. I had just declared war. The next morning, I expected things to calm down. After all, she had already embarrassed herself, got fined, and made a fool of her argument. But Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. No, she was the type to double down. And that became apparent the moment I stepped outside to grab my morning paper. She was already there, standing stiffly on her front lawn, arms crossed. "Morning, Karen," I said, trying to act normal. She let out a loud, dramatic huff. "Don't think this is over." I sighed. "Karen, it was a fine. Just pay it and move on." "Oh, I will," she sneered. "But I'll also be making sure this neighborhood isn't turned into a circus by your wild, uncontrollable children." I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from laughing. "You seriously still going on about this?" She took a step forward, lowering her voice. "You have no idea who you're messing with." And with that ominous threat, she spun on her heel and marched back inside her house. I watched her go, shaking my head. It was impressive, really. Most people would have given up by now, but Karen had somehow convinced herself that she was on a righteous mission. Unfortunately for her, my kids weren't about to stop playing outside just because she had a personal vendetta against fun. That afternoon, I sat on my porch while my kids ran around in the yard, laughing and chasing each other. Everything felt peaceful, almost normal. That is, until I heard the unmistakable sound of Karen's front door slamming open. I turned my head just in time to see her storming across her lawn toward me, a folded piece of paper clenched in her fist. "Huh," she boomed, waving the paper in my face. "Thought you were smart, didn't you?" I blinked. "What?" Karen shoved the paper toward me. "The HOA sent you a warning." I took the paper, unfolding it carefully. Sure enough, it was an official notice from the Homeowners Association, stating that I had received a complaint about excessive noise after reasonable hours. I looked back up at Karen, who was practically vibrating with excitement. "This has to be a joke." She crossed her arms, grinning like she had just won the lottery. "It's not a joke. You broke the rules. Now you have to suffer the consequences." I read the complaint again, then checked the timestamp. My eyes narrowed. "Karen, this says the violation happened at 10 p.m. last night." "Exactly," she snapped. "See? The HOA agrees with me." I smirked. "Karen, my family was out of town last night." The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might pass out. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I could practically hear the gears in her head screeching to a halt. That's not possible," she finally managed. "Oh, it is," I said, pulling out my phone. "Want to see the security footage?" She paled even more. That's not necessary." I ignored her, tapping on my security app. A few moments later, a clear video played on the screen. Our empty driveway, the stillness of the house, and the timestamp proving that we hadn't even been home. I turned the phone toward her, and her jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might break a tooth. "So," I said, struggling to keep the amusement out of my voice, "either my house is haunted, or you made a false complaint." Karen let out a strangled noise. This is ridiculous. The HOA wouldn't just make something up." I shrugged. "Guess I should let them know someone's been filing false reports." Her eyes widened. "Wait, too late." I was already dialing the HOA's number. The call didn't last long. The moment I told them I had video proof of being out of town, the HOA rep on the other end sighed heavily and assured me they would look into it. That was HOA language for, "We're about to have a very awkward conversation with Karen." Karen stood frozen, her mind clearly racing for a way out of this mess. I could almost see her soul leaving her body when I hung up the call and gave her a polite smile. "Looks like you might be the one breaking the rules, Karen." She sputtered. You're manipulating the system. You probably faked that footage." I chuckled. "Sure, Karen. I faked a whole vacation just to trick you." Her face twisted into something ugly. "This isn't over." I sighed. "Karen, maybe just let it go. You're making things worse for yourself." But Karen wasn't listening. She turned on her heel and stomped back to her house, slamming the door behind her. I knew right then that she wasn't giving up. She was just planning her next move. And if I had learned anything from dealing with her, it was that she wasn't the type to go down quietly. I was right. The next day, I woke up to find my kids' sidewalk chalk drawings smeared into a muddy mess. The colorful unicorns and rainbows they had spent hours working on were now nothing but ruined streaks on the pavement. My youngest, Sophie, stood next to the destruction, clutching her unicorn plushie, her eyes welling with tears. "Daddy," she sniffled, "who did this?" I already knew the answer. I looked up, and sure enough, there was Karen, standing on her porch, sipping a cup of coffee like she hadn't just committed a crime against childhood joy. She caught me looking and smirked. I took a deep breath, keeping my anger in check. This was getting out of hand. If she wanted to play dirty, I had no problem getting my hands a little messy too. Karen thought she could win this little war. She had no idea what was coming next. The destruction of the sidewalk chalk drawings was the last straw. I had tolerated Karen's antics for long enough, and while I wasn't about to stoop to her level, I also wasn't going to sit back and let her keep getting away with this. She had made it clear that she wasn't going to stop until she had complete control over the neighborhood, and that wasn't going to happen on my watch. My kids were upset, but I reassured them that everything would be fine. Deep down, though, I knew this was far from over. Karen had declared war, and it was time for me to start fighting back. That afternoon, I decided to have a word with some of the other parents in the neighborhood. If Karen was doing this to me, there was a good chance she had harassed other families too. And sure enough, the moment I brought up her name, I was met with a chorus of groans and eye rolls. "She's been a nightmare since the day she moved in," one mother sighed. "Last summer, she called the HOA on us because our kids were playing with water balloons in the front yard. She claimed they were damaging the pavement." Another dad shook his head. "She tried to get my son banned from the community pool because she thought he was splashing too much." It's a pool. What does she expect? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Karen wasn't just after my kids. She had been terrorizing the entire neighborhood for years. The only reason she hadn't been stopped was because nobody wanted to deal with her. But now, things were different. Now, we had a chance to put an end to her reign of terror. That evening, I started gathering evidence. I printed out a copy of the false HOA complaint she had filed against me. I saved the security footage proving that my family had been out of town. I even compiled statements from the other parents detailing all the times she had harassed them. The plan was simple. I was going to present everything to the HOA and demand that they take action against her. No more false complaints. No more petty revenge. No more nonsense. If she wanted to play dirty, I was going to fight back with cold, hard facts. But Karen, being Karen, wasn't about to make things easy. The very next morning, another HOA letter arrived in my mailbox. This one was even more ridiculous than the last. According to the complaint, my kids had been recklessly riding their bikes in a dangerous manner, putting the safety of the community at risk. The accusation was so absurd that I laughed out loud. My kids were 7 and 10 years old. The most reckless thing they did on their bikes was ride in circles pretending to be superheroes. I wasn't the only one who found it ridiculous. When I showed the letter to my neighbor, he snorted. "Reckless bike riding? What does she think this is, a Fast and Furious movie?" I had no doubt in my mind that Karen was behind this. She had lost the battle with the police officer, and now she was trying to win by flooding the HOA with nonsense complaints. I wasted no time contacting the HOA again. This time, I didn't just call. I went straight to their office. When I arrived, I asked to speak with the person handling my case, a middle-aged man named Greg who looked like he had dealt with his fair share of difficult neighbors. The moment I sat down, I placed the security footage and the stack of complaints in front of him. "Karen is abusing the system," I said plainly. "She's filing false reports, wasting everyone's time, and harassing multiple families in the neighborhood. This needs to stop." Greg flipped through the documents, his expression growing more annoyed with each page. "You're not the first person to complain about her," he muttered. "We've had issues." I raised an eyebrow, and he sighed. "And we've tried to talk to her, but she always finds some way to manipulate the rules. Technically, she hasn't broken any major bylaws, just a lot of minor ones." I pointed at the false noise complaint. "She made this up. She knew I wasn't home. That's harassment." Greg rubbed his temples. "You're right. And if we can prove she knowingly submitted a false complaint, that's grounds for disciplinary action." I leaned back in my chair. "So what's the next step?" Greg exhaled heavily. "We'll need to formally investigate her. That means gathering statements, reviewing footage, and confronting her with the evidence." "Good," I said, "because she's not stopping. She destroyed my kids' chalk drawings yesterday. What's next? Slashing tires?" Greg shook his head. "This woman really thinks she owns the place, huh? You have no idea. By the time I left the office, I felt like we were finally making progress. Karen had spent years bullying people into submission, but this time, she had picked the wrong family. But Karen wasn't finished yet. That night, as I was taking out the trash, I noticed something odd. There was a figure lurking near my driveway. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but then I saw movement. Someone was standing near my trash cans, doing something. My heart pounded as I stepped closer. The figure turned, and under the dim glow of the street lights, I saw exactly who it was. Karen. And she was holding a can of spray paint. For a split second, we just stared at each other. Then, like a cartoon villain caught in the act, she yelped, dropped the spray paint, and bolted back toward her house. I stood there stunned. Slowly, I looked down at the driveway. My mailbox had been spray painted. In big, bold, sloppy letters, she had written, "Noisy brats live here." I let out a slow breath, rubbing my temples. This woman had officially lost her mind. By the time I turned back toward her house, she had already slammed her door shut. But she had made one fatal mistake. She had forgotten about my security cameras. The next morning, I took the footage straight to Greg. This time, there was no hesitation. He called a board meeting immediately, and by the end of the day, Karen was officially under investigation. She had spent years making everyone else's lives miserable. Now, it was her turn to suffer the consequences. And I had a feeling she wasn't going to handle it well. The neighborhood had been on edge ever since Karen's antics reached a new level of insanity. The spray-painted mailbox was the final straw, not just for me, but for everyone who had been quietly suffering under her reign of terror. I wasn't the only one who had dealt with her ridiculous complaints, false reports, and outright harassment. The difference was that this time, she had been caught in the act. Word spread fast. By the time I walked outside the next morning, a small group of neighbors had already gathered near my driveway, murmuring amongst themselves as they stared at the mess Karen had left behind. Some of them had seen the security footage I had sent to the HOA, and it didn't take long before they started sharing their own horror stories. She called the cops on my teenager for playing basketball in our driveway. One man grumbled, arms crossed over his chest. She left a nasty note in my mailbox last month because my lawn wasn't perfectly trimmed, a woman chimed in. She even reported me to the HOA for having weeds, and I don't even have a garden. She made my 6-year-old cry. Another mother added bitterly, told him that sidewalk chalk was vandalism and that she'd make sure he never played outside again. That was the moment I realized Karen's war wasn't just against me. It was against anyone who didn't bow to her ridiculous rules. But this time, she had gone too far. She had gotten comfortable bullying the neighborhood, assuming no one would push back. That was about to change. I spent the afternoon speaking with Greg from the HOA again, who assured me that Karen was being investigated for multiple violations. She wasn't just facing a warning. If the board ruled against her, she could be fined, restricted from making complaints, or even removed from the HOA entirely. That was the kind of justice this neighborhood had been waiting for. But Karen, being Karen, wasn't about to take this lying down. That evening, she made her next move. I was sitting in the living room when my wife glanced out the window and stiffened. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered. I got up and followed her gaze. Karen was outside, standing in her yard, holding a clipboard. Every few minutes, she'd march up to a neighbor's house, knock on their door, and start what looked like a very aggressive conversation. I couldn't hear the words, but judging by the expressions of the people she was speaking to, it wasn't going well for her. Curious, I stepped outside. The moment Karen spotted me, her face twisted into something between smugness and fury. She marched toward me, waving her clipboard like it was some kind of weapon. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. I sighed. "Regret what, Karen?" "Making sure you finally face the consequences of your actions." She shoved the clipboard at me. "This is a petition. It's to have you removed from the neighborhood." I blinked, staring at the paper in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious," she snapped. "You've been harassing me. You've been spreading lies. You've been turning the whole neighborhood against me." "I don't have to turn anyone against you, Karen," I said, struggling not to laugh. "You've done that all by yourself." Her eyes narrowed. "You think this is funny?" "A little bit, yeah." Her nostrils flared. "Well, let's see if you're still laughing when you have to explain to your children why they don't have a home anymore." That was when my patience ran out. I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough to make sure she knew I wasn't playing games anymore. "You've called the cops on my kids. You filed false complaints. You vandalized my property. And you really think you're the victim here?" She scoffed. I was defending my rights as a homeowner. Karen, I said, shaking my head. No one wants you here anymore. You've spent years making this place miserable for everyone else. And now that people are standing up to you, you're panicking. Her expression flickered just for a second, but then she straightened her shoulders. We'll see who wins, she said, turning on her heel. She stomped off to the next house, but I already knew how this was going to end. No one was going to sign her petition. If anything, she had just given the entire neighborhood even more reason to want her gone. The next few days were pure chaos. Karen kept pushing, trying to turn people against me, but it wasn't working. If anything, it backfired spectacularly. The more she ranted about being targeted, the more people came forward with their own stories about her. It became clear that she wasn't the victim. She was the problem. Greg from the HOA called me again, this time with an update. We've received over a dozen formal complaints about Karen just this week, he said. Her case is going to the HOA board for review. I smiled. And what happens if she loses? She'll be fined for harassment, banned from filing further complaints, and if she refuses to comply, we'll escalate to legal action. That was exactly what I wanted to hear. But Karen wasn't done yet. She had one last, desperate move to play. The night before the HOA meeting, my door rang. I opened the door to find Karen standing there, arms crossed, face twisted into an expression that was equal parts fury and desperation. What do you want, Karen? I asked, already exhausted. Her voice was tight, controlled. Call off your little campaign. I laughed. It's not a campaign, Karen. It's consequences. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You think you've won? You think the HOA is going to get rid of me? I have connections. I tilted my head. Connections? She smirked. I know people on the board. They like me. I crossed my arms. I don't think they do. Her smirk faltered. You don't know everything. No, but I do know this, I said. Tomorrow, you're going to be sitting in a room full of people who have had enough of you. And for the first time in your life, you won't be able to weasel your way out of it. Her face twisted in rage. You're going to regret this. That's the second time you've said that, I said, shaking my head. And yet, I'm not the one who's in trouble. She didn't have a response to that. Instead, she let out an angry huff, spun around, and stormed off. I watched her go, then closed the door, feeling a sense of satisfaction settle over me. Tomorrow was the day. Tomorrow, she would finally face the consequences of everything she had done. And somehow, I had a feeling she wasn't going to handle it well. The morning of the HOA meeting was electric with anticipation. It wasn't just me who was ready for this. Practically the whole neighborhood was buzzing. Karen had burned so many bridges that people were coming just to watch her finally be held accountable. The HOA usually held their meetings in a small conference room at the community center, but today they had to move it to a larger space because so many people wanted to attend. That was how much damage Karen had done over the years. I arrived early, but I wasn't the first one there. A few of my neighbors had already taken their seats, whispering amongst themselves. Greg, the HOA representative who had been handling the case, greeted me with a nod. He looked tired, like he had spent the last few days dealing with Karen's endless complaints. She's already sent 3 emails this morning, he muttered. One of them was just the word unfair in all caps. I smirked. Sounds about right. It wasn't long before Karen arrived. She walked in with her head held high, acting as if she was about to receive an award instead of facing disciplinary action. She was wearing her usual self-righteous expression, clutching a thick stack of papers that I assumed was filled with whatever nonsense arguments she had prepared. The room quieted as the meeting began. Greg cleared his throat and addressed the group. We're here today to discuss multiple complaints regarding a homeowner who has been accused of harassment, filing false reports, and violating HOA policies. After a thorough investigation, we have gathered evidence and will be reviewing the findings now. Karen immediately shot up from her seat. I would like to speak first. Greg sighed. Karen, we will allow you to respond, but we need to present the case first. Karen huffed, but sat down, crossing her arms like a child being told no for the first time. Greg continued. He listed every complaint that had been filed against Karen in the past few years, from the false police calls to the fabricated HOA violations. Each accusation was backed by evidence, including emails, security footage, and witness statements. When he got to the part about her spray painting my mailbox, he even pulled up a still image from my security camera showing Karen in the act. The room was silent for a moment. Then someone in the back let out a low whistle. Karen's face had gone pale, but she quickly recovered, forcing a smirk. This is all a smear campaign, she claimed. I have been nothing but a responsible member of this community. I was simply trying to maintain order while others allowed chaos to take over. Greg didn't even blink. Karen, we have evidence that you knowingly filed false complaints. That alone is grounds for action. Karen straightened. I was reporting disturbances. Isn't that my right as a homeowner? Not when the disturbances didn't happen, Greg replied. You accused the family of making noise when they weren't even home. You reported children for riding bikes. You called the police over a game of tag. This is not maintaining order. This is harassment. Karen scoffed. Oh, please. Everyone in this neighborhood has been against me from the start. It's clear that I'm being targeted simply because I expect people to follow the rules. A woman sitting near the front turned around in her chair. Karen, you tried to get my 6-year-old banned from the community pool because you thought he splashed too much. That's not following the rules. That's just being a miserable person. Another man raised his hand. And let's not forget the time she tried to get the HOA to fine me for having too many flowers in my front yard. Karen turned bright red. Landscaping regulations exist for a reason. Greg cleared his throat. Karen, at this point, it is clear that your actions have caused significant distress to multiple families in this community. Based on the evidence presented, the board has made a decision regarding your status in the HOA. The room went still. Greg looked down at his notes before delivering the verdict. Effective immediately, you will be fined for harassment, the false reports, and the vandalism incident. You will also be banned from filing any further complaints for the next year. The moment those words left his mouth, Karen jumped to her feet. What? Greg continued. Furthermore, if this behavior continues, the HOA will escalate to legal action. Your membership in this association is contingent on following the rules, and harassment of your neighbors is not tolerated. Karen looked like she was about to explode. This is insane. I am the victim here. You're all conspiring against me. Greg didn't even flinch. Karen, if you cannot abide by these conditions, you are free to sell your home and move elsewhere. A murmur rippled through the crowd. It was the most diplomatic way of saying, get out if you don't like it, and everyone knew it. Karen's mouth opened and closed like she wanted to keep arguing, but she had nothing left to stand on. She had finally lost. After a long, tense silence, she shoved her stack of papers into her bag and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her so hard that the walls shook. The moment she was gone, the tension in the room lifted. People started talking, laughing, and exchanging relieved glances. It was over. As I stood to leave, one of my neighbors clapped me on the back. You did it, man. You finally got rid of her. I chuckled. I don't know if she's leaving just yet, but at least she won't be making our lives miserable anymore. Greg approached me on his way out. If she violates the ruling, let us know. At this point, we're done giving her second chances. I nodded. Appreciate it. As I walked home, I couldn't help but smile. Karen had spent years trying to control the neighborhood, trying to make everyone miserable, but in the end, all she had done was isolate herself. She had no more power, no more influence, and no more control. When I got back to my house, my kids were playing outside like nothing had ever happened. It was peaceful. It was normal. And best of all, it was finally free from Karen's nonsense. But something told me this wasn't over just yet. Karen wasn't the type to go down quietly, and if I knew her at all, she was already scheming her next move. The difference now was that nobody was on her side anymore, and without her power, she was just another bitter person with no one left to listen. For the first time in years, the neighborhood finally felt peaceful. There were no more sudden visits from the police, no more absurd HOA complaints, and no more screaming matches about kids playing outside. It was like the air itself was lighter, as if Karen's presence had been weighing the entire community down. My kids ran around freely, their laughter filling the evening sky without fear of some ridiculous complaint. But as much as I wanted to believe it was over, I knew Karen too well. She wasn't the type to take a loss gracefully. She had spent years controlling the neighborhood through intimidation and manipulation, and now that she had been stripped of that power, I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. For the next few days, Karen stayed uncharacteristically quiet. Her car was still in the driveway, but she rarely came outside. The blinds on her windows were almost always drawn, and there was no sign of her usual morning routine. No yelling at neighbors, no pacing around with a clipboard, no glaring at children. It was eerie, like a villain retreating into their lair to plan their next attack. I knew better than to let my guard down. Karen wasn't sulking, she was plotting. My suspicions were confirmed one afternoon when my neighbor Lisa knocked on my door with an exasperated expression. The moment I opened it, she shook her head. "You won't believe what she's doing now." I sighed. "I can probably guess." Lisa handed me a piece of paper. I scanned it quickly, my eyebrows rising. It was a letter one Karen had slipped into people's mailboxes. "To all my dear neighbors," it read. "I regret to inform you that our once beautiful and orderly community has fallen into chaos. The HOA has been corrupted by individuals who do not respect the rules, and I have been unfairly silenced for simply trying to uphold the standards that made this neighborhood great. But I refuse to back down. If you care about preserving our peaceful way of life, please sign the attached petition demanding the removal of unfair HOA leadership and the reinstatement of our community's original values." I almost laughed out loud. She's seriously trying to overthrow the HOA now? Lisa crossed her arms. "She went door to door this morning. She tried to convince me to sign it, said she's planning to take legal action against the HOA. I shook my head in disbelief. She just doesn't know when to quit, does she? "Oh, it gets worse," Lisa said. "Apparently, she's been telling people that if they don't help her, she's going to report them for various violations once she gets her power back." I exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of my nose. Karen had officially lost her mind. She had already been banned from filing complaints, and now she was trying to stage some kind of neighborhood coup. It would have been hilarious if it weren't so pathetic. It didn't take long for word to spread. Within hours, a group chat had formed between several families in the neighborhood, all of them discussing Karen's latest stunt. Some people were worried about what she might try next, but most of them were just fed up. "She's completely lost it," one neighbor texted. "Who does she think she is, a dictator?" another replied. "What do we do about this?" someone asked. I had an idea. Instead of fighting her, instead of giving her the reaction she wanted, we decided to let her dig her own grave. Nobody signed her petition. Nobody gave her any attention. If she wanted to rant and rave about a non-existent conspiracy against her, she could do it alone. By the end of the week, Karen's plan had completely backfired. Not only did nobody sign her petition, but several more families submitted complaints about her harassment. Greg from the HOA sent out an official notice reminding everyone that Karen was banned from filing grievances and that her attempts to overturn the HOA's decision were meaningless. Karen had officially run out of moves. The breaking point came a few days later. I was out in my front yard when I saw her dragging a "for sale" sign onto her lawn. She struggled with it, stabbing it into the ground with so much force that I thought she might break it. I watched in silence as she stomped back toward her house, her movements stiff with frustration. She had finally realized she had no more power left. A few hours later, Greg called me. "Thought you'd want to hear this," he said. "Karen's selling her house. She officially notified the HOA today." I exhaled, shaking my head. "She really couldn't stand losing, huh? She brought this on herself," Greg said. "Nobody wants to live in a community where they're hated by everyone." He was right. Karen had spent years making herself the most despised person in the neighborhood, and in the end, she had no choice but to leave. Over the next few weeks, I saw less and less of her. The blinds remained shut, and she barely stepped outside. When she did, she avoided eye contact with everyone, moving quickly like she was afraid of confrontation. It was a stark contrast to the woman who had once stood on her porch barking orders at people like she was the queen of the cul-de-sac. Then, one morning, moving trucks arrived. It was a surreal sight, watching her belongings being packed away piece by piece. Some neighbors gathered outside, not to gloat, but simply to confirm that it was finally happening. Karen, for once, didn't say a word. She kept her head down, her lips pressed into a tight line as she supervised the movers. She had spent years making noise, making herself the center of attention, but now, in her final moments in the neighborhood, she was utterly silent. When the last box was loaded, she finally turned toward the street. Her gaze flickered toward me, and for a moment, I thought she might say something, maybe a final insult, maybe a desperate attempt to rewrite history. But she didn't. She just got into her car, slammed the door, and drove away. The second her car disappeared down the road, a slow cheer spread through the crowd. It wasn't loud or obnoxious, but it was filled with relief. Karen was gone. And just like that, the neighborhood was truly peaceful. In the days that followed, life returned to normal. The kids played outside without fear of police being called. People greeted each other warmly instead of with wary glances. It was like we had all been holding our breath for years and had finally been allowed to exhale. One afternoon, I was sitting on my porch when Lisa walked by with her son. She smiled at me. I gotta say, it feels different without her around. I nodded. Better. Way better. Way better, she said with a chuckle. Not long after, a new family moved into Karen's old house, a couple with 2 kids. They introduced themselves right away, friendly and eager to be part of the community. The first thing their kids did was run outside and start drawing with sidewalk chalk. Nobody stopped them. Nobody complained. And this time, nobody ever would.